Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating piece of source material, a narrative titled The Unmistakable Spectrum of the Flame. What's so cool about this text is how it weaves together two worlds you don't normally see in the same room: empirical plasma physics and deep narrative theology. We're going to break down the specific claims, the experiments, and the ultimate conclusions presented in this story to see exactly how it builds its case. All right, let's dive right in. So, here is the central question the text asks. Can the spoken word physically alter the atomic structure of a flame? And to be clear, we aren't just talking about your breath flickering a candle flame here. The source material explores this wild concept of sound, specifically sacred spoken verses, actually translating into measurable physical data at the subatomic level. It literally asks us to consider if sound waves can leave a permanent structural fingerprint on plasma. Let's look at how the story sets up a really rigorous scientific framework to test this exact premise.
Section 1. The Plasma Hypothesis.
Our story kicks off in Germany, at the Max Planck Institute for Plasma Physics. The lead researcher is Dr. Zubair Al-Fahad, who works with these massive, ultra-high-temperature plasma chambers. But to make this a true scientific inquiry, the narrative introduces our skeptic, Dr. Helmut Schmidt. His baseline materialist view is crystal clear. He says, a flame is merely a game of changing electron energy levels. There is no effect of Bismillah in it. Helmut is basically acting as our proxy for skepticism here. Zubair, on the other hand, is wondering if verses from the Quran describing fire might actually carry a physical phonetic signature that a flame could respond to.
Moving on to Part 2, the Two Burners Experiment.
To test this, Zubair sets up a strictly controlled lab experiment using two identical gas burners. Burner 1 is ignited in complete silence, and its emission spectrum? Totally normal. It just shows the standard random hydrogen alpha and beta lines you'd expect to see at 656 and 486 nanometers. But Burner 2 is ignited while a human voice speaks the phrase Bismillah followed by a 10-minute playback of a specific Quranic verse, Surah Al-Hajj, which specifically mentions fire. When Zubair analyzes the high-resolution spectrometer data for that second burner, he doesn't just see the standard hydrogen lines. He finds a massive anomaly, a brand new, exceptionally sharp spectral peak.
That anomaly sits exactly at 432 nanometers. Now, within the universe of the story, this is a huge revelation. This 432 nanometer peak completely defies all known gaseous elements. Seriously, it shouldn't be there. It's a totally foreign signature in the plasma, and it only appears in the burner exposed to the spoken verses. So, the absolute crucial question is, how does the story explain this physically?
Well, the source material gives us this highly specific fictional physics concept to explain it called acoustic plasma coupling. Think of the sound waves of a spoken word kind of like stones dropping into a pond, creating ripples. In this scenario, the mechanical stress of human speech, the acoustic pressure vibrating between 40 and 100 hertz, hits the vibrating edge of the burner. This physical pressure literally modulates the electron density of the flame. It physically alters the plasma's dBi length, which is essentially its electrical shield. The flame is literally vibrating in harmony with the acoustic envelope of the Arabic pronunciation. Pretty wild, right?
Section 3. Peer Review and the Skeptic's Failed Test.
Now, naturally, Dr. Helmut Schmidt is not convinced. He assumes this has to be a fluke, so he sets out to recreate the conditions using incredibly strict, synthetic laboratory controls. Step 1, he builds a programmable burner to match the exact oxygen-hydrogen ratio of Zubair's test. Step 2, he programs the computer to flawlessly match the temperature profile, degree by degree. Step 3, he ignites it via computer control. It's a perfect, sterile, synthetic recreation. But when Helmut checks his spectrometer, that 432 nanometer peak is completely gone. Nothing but white noise. Helmut entirely fails to replicate the anomaly. Zubair actually explains exactly why Helmut's computer-controlled experiment failed. The missing variable here is what Zubair calls frequency-dependent oxidation. Sure, Helmut perfectly controlled the temperature and the gas flow, but static computer controls just cannot replicate the dynamic, time-dependent mechanical stress of a living, spoken word. The acoustic pressure of human speech creates these microscopic variations in air density that literally change how the fire oxidizes. Simply put, the computer lacked the physical breath of the word.
Let's dig deeper into Part 4, decoding the 432 nanometer peak. Using picosecond time-resolved spectroscopy, Zubair zooms way in on that singular anomaly. And this is where the narrative turns physical data into something almost visual. That single 432 nanometer peak actually breaks down into 3 distinct subpeaks.
Zubair runs these waves through a 3D choreography algorithm, which reveals the specific paths, the ion trajectories of the charged particles. And remarkably, in the story, these trajectories map perfectly to the phonetic structure of the Quranic phrase describing fire. The plasma particles aren't just moving randomly, they are tracing the actual spatiotemporal path of the spoken verse.
To push this further, Zubair conducts an orientation test. He plays 10 different audio clips of different chapters near the flame to measure its response. The results are super striking. When Surah Al-Hajj, a chapter with a heavy focus on fire, is played, the 432 nanometer peak brightness jumps by a massive 40%. Surah Al-Masad, which mentions the fire of Abu Lahab, causes a 25% increase. But Surah Al-Ikhlas, which contains no mention of fire at all, only yields a 10% baseline increase. So, the story proposes that the flame's resonance changes based specifically on the phonetic descriptions of fire. The flame is essentially acting as a transducer, physically responding to the thematic content of a sound wave.
This realization brings us to the absolute climax of the narrative. Helmut, who is deeply shaken by this data, conducts his own secret midnight experiment. He lights a candle in total silence, and then plays the audio. Nothing happens, so he puts it out. Then he lights the candle while actively speaking the Bismillah. Instantly, that 432 nanometer peak appears. Rocked by this, Helmut writes in his diary, "The when of light is also important. The moment of Bismillah becomes a birthmark of the flame that cannot be erased. The exact moment of ignition dictates the flame's permanent physical memory."
Finally, Part 5, the conclusion and the legacy of Ishraq.
So Zubair presents these incredible findings at the International Conference on Plasma Physics. And Helmut, our former skeptic, he actually stands up in front of the entire hall and publicly endorses the phenomenon as a scientific fact, fully admitting his computers could never replicate it. Following this, the Max Planck Lab is renamed Ishraq, meaning radiance, and they adopt an amazing practical application. The researchers now use a candle ignited with the spoken word as a daily baseline calibration. They literally use the acoustic signature of the Bismillah to reduce baseline plasma noise in their highly sensitive equipment.
The narrative ends with this really powerful philosophical shift. Zubair points out that fire doesn't just burn, it reads, which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to chew on. If every flame carries a physical memory of its ignition, if the acoustic pressure of human speech actually leaves a permanent spectral footprint in plasma, what else in the natural world might be quietly recording our words? It completely reframes how we think about the physical impact of language. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope you found it as fascinating as I did.